It's Friday, and that means it's another edition of the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted. I'm John. I'm here with my managing partner and son, Jeremy. How you doing this week?
Hey, I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing fine, just fine. And let's just jump right into it. We talked briefly this morning, and I said I have no idea what I want to talk about. And then, I did my morning news roundup, and I found a very interesting article in the Atlantic, and just out today. And in fact, I thought I'd spin on this because it's something you and I have engaged each other about now, actually for a number of years. So it's familiar turf. Marjorie Taylor Greene. Three words that I really never thought that I'd be discussing about anything, let alone on this podcast. But she sent out a tweet that's had an enormous response and ripple effect, in which she calls for a national divorce. And she says that healing between, and these are her words, red states and blue states are just no longer possible. Why pretend? In her view, there is no national purpose. There's no national agreement about the Constitution, the role of the federal government, the role of the states. And so basically she is arguing we're coming up on 250 years and it's not working anymore, this brand of federalism. So she is suggesting that red states and blue states separate from each other and each take their own model, whether it's a confederation or one's federal and the other is states' rights. But she also calls for an enablement, both by legislation and otherwise, an enablement of this to take place, the separation, divorce, even to the point where folks who are liberal, let's say, and don't want to live in red states, or vice versa, are empowered and encouraged, and I would assume that means financially as well, to move. Now, she is getting panned by liberals. She's being panned actually by a number of conservatives. But the very fact that this is being discussed in the Atlantic, which is a pretty respectable, no, let's make that very respectable and responsible journal, is a sign that this debate has been kicked up a notch. And I might add that the Atlantic covers it as part of an interview they've done with a fellow named Kreitner, who has written extensively about the separation of states, much like what Marjorie Taylor Greene is calling for. And so we have come to this point. We've come to this point before in our history, but here we are. Do we lack a sufficient national purpose? Are we really in the midst of a culture war that knows no compromise, knows no path forward? Is this a tipping point in American history? And should we be given serious consideration to reorganizing? Those are broad questions, but those are real questions. You and I have polled on this, of course, for years, and there's nothing in our polling that would contradict anything that Congresswoman Taylor Greene has briefly outlined. What do you think? Is this a point of no return for our national purpose and community?
It could be. Just to back up on the polling, the last time I asked a question, I believe was late 2020. I do not believe I have data on from the year 2021, but we had been tracking it, well, really for a long time, but under the current banner of Zogby Strategies, maybe 2017, and consistently, I played around with the messages a little bit, but the basic sense was a state having the final say over its destiny, including wanting to go its own way, a breakaway, versus the national union must be preserved at all costs, sometimes even throwing in their military intervention being necessary. And what you always saw was about 40% of voters nationwide, on average, about 40% of voters who agreed with what would be somewhere between nullification and secession. And so, and by the way, this was across the board: liberals, conservatives, probably less so moderates regionally. Some of the highest was coming from Western states, a lot of it in California. So this is both sides.
Jerry, what about young old? Young old.
I can't remember.
Can't
remember, but it was across the board. I can't remember whether younger tilted higher or not. I almost sense that they did. But you put that aside and you just look at history, world history. I like to mention this. You could take a random century over the last 1,000 years in Europe. You take whether it's the 13th century, the 17th or the 18th, whatever. It would be fascinating to pick that one century and then see how in 100 years the maps shifted. In other words, Europe was in constant flux. It still is, right? I mean, the reunification of Germany is very new. But since then, we've seen already how many of these movements, these parties that want to leave the European Union. They're in many countries. Of course, we saw it in the UK. Italy came very close. France came very close. Austria came very close. The point is that I think that this is a global trend. It's built into our history. I would say to Marjorie Taylor Greene and others that if you're going to go public with this, I think the responsible way to do it is to go back to two volumes that are very important in American history, and that's the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Now, I read the Federalist Papers in college. I haven't read the Anti-Federalist, but I got the book, and so I'm about to start it. It's interesting that this has come up around the time that I just decided that I wanted to dive into the book. But I think we're going to have a national conversation on it, I think we have to do it. We have to be aware of what the real historical debate is, philosophically, political, scientifically, and what the founding generation debated over, because this was essential to the formation of this country. So I think that would be the really responsible way to do it. And the only other thing that I would say is that I think most Americans, probably all Americans, would prefer that we don't go further down the road of separation, of infighting, and of the tension that we currently have between the two parties at war. A lot of families have been divided. A lot of friendships have been lost. And my sense is that there's kind of this notion of a last resort, and you saw people do this. You've seen them doing it for a number of years now. They're voting with their feet. They're saying, I can't stand my state government. I can't stand what's going on in the politics and the economics of my state. I'm going to go to another place. A lot of people from California have gone to Texas. A lot of people from New York have gone to Florida. Rust Belt states are losing a lot of population. Southern and Western states are gaining. Meanwhile, there's this movement called Greater Idaho, where residents in the eastern half of Oregon believe that the state is too much represented by the coast, and that there are two different sets of values and worldviews, and that they're more like Idaho. And so now there's actually steam gaining towards Idaho gaining a lot of these eastern counties of Oregon. I think this is what we're going to see in response to a desire that people want to discontinue fighting, because I think they understand it could get out of control. But if we're going to have these conversations, I think we need to be rooted in the exact principles of it.
So this is not a new thing
Exactly.
in U.S. history. I mean, right from the very beginning, ideologically, militarily, as well. I mean, it was a bloody civil war. But then you move into the 20th century, and to a great degree, the national purpose healed. Folks, whether they were mandated to or just simply believed in patriotism, they joined up World War I and answered the call in World War II. The nation was mobilized, and then after that, by the time you get into the 60s, it's a story really of splitting up. The only times in recent decades that there was some semblance of national unity would be the Reagan years, particularly his landslide re-election, and then, of course, the initial rallying around President George W. Bush around Iraq. That didn't last very long. You also look at our elections. Just in the 21st century alone, beginning with the election of 2000, you have this not only incredibly close elections. Yes, Barack Obama won majorities. I get it. But there were strong, 46, 47, 48% the other side. And with only a few exceptions, one side being willing to accept the legitimacy of the other side's victory. I mean, we've been heading down this road. Should this debate be encouraged and enabled? Is it possible? I mean, suppose we were invaded. Would there be a national unity? We can't seem to unify over our own disasters. I mean, look at this train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. It is intensely partisan. When federal government should be mobilized and there should be national unity, there should be a mobilization that helps these people and helps them right away. Instead, there's this finger pointing and an emphasis on who's to blame and who fell asleep at the switch, literally. Is it possible to restore national unity, or should we just go with the flow on this discussion of separation?
I don't know. I think, let the debate play out. I mean, right? I don't know that I mean, look, the national media will take its stance on it, and they'll certainly get the exact message out, and I'm sure that would be against it. But there are too many disasters. I mean, the East Palestine situation is a debacle. I mean, Biden still hasn't even shown up. Biden went to Ukraine and Poland. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine if I were in Ohio, how I would feel about that. I mean, I can't imagine I'd be too happy about that. Buttigieg showed up too late. I think Trump got there before he did. And but that may be the tip of the iceberg. That maybe that's the cherry on top, or maybe that's even a little bit of the tipping point. I don't know, but I think I don't think it's going to go away, that sentiment. I mean, our polling data has continuously shown that there's a sizable enough portion of the public that would be in favor of it. Your question as to an invasion, I don't know. I don't know how to address that. I'm not sure.
Let me switch gears here. There's a polling anomaly that I want to share with you. If you look at the president's job approval ratings, if you just take a look at this week alone, the two polls out this week have him at 47% approval, 48% approval. If you go back last week and the four polls that came out the latter part of last week, including the two I just mentioned this week, he's at 47, 48, 49, and then the anomaly, the outlier at 40. No question about the fact that his average is higher. It's clearly at 45%. This week, it averages out to 47.5%. And three of the last four polls are in the high 40s. And yet, there's a poll out by Rasmussen. Rasmussen has the president at 48% job approval, which is high. You know, by the same token, it shows Nikki Haley leading the president in a matchup 45 to 41%. That's an anomaly there. How do you get, you know, your highest job approval rating and then be put against someone who's really not that known on the national stage, leading you not only by 4 percentage points, but the incumbent president polling only 41%. That's anemic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I understand that is if you isolate the issue to Biden's likability or even the favorability of his job or the approval of his job from moderates and Democrats, you have a higher average that's going to go above the 50s, but the Republicans, where he's intensely disliked, is going to bring that down. But it's a totally different variable to put Biden up against somebody young and vibrant and I don't want to say new on the scene, experienced, but re-emerging on the scene. It's a totally different ball game. So that's to say, in this moment, to the public, do you approve of Joe Biden's job? And just a little under half approve of it. But what does that mean over wanting him to be the president after 2024? Those are two different ball games. Remember, it has been more and more persistent in the media of his notion that he's too old. There was a big Politico article that came out, I think yesterday, about the concern over why isn't Biden announcing the inner circle are wondering. Well, they say on the one hand that it's too early. If you look historically, Obama didn't do it till April. Other people didn't do it until April. But then they admit that the longer he holds off, the more concern there is, and the more the public gets concerned is he really old, too old? And we're seeing those in that message in a number of different articles. So, long story short, do you approve of his job right now? It's going up. But do you want him to be president, a year and a half from now? Totally different ballgame.
So he takes an 8 or 9 hour flight to Warsaw, and then overnight takes a 10-hour train ride unannounced into Kyiv, delivers an historic speech, gets back on the train and goes back to Warsaw, flies home. Where's that 80-year-old man who's losing it? I'm not seeing it. That's a pretty robust fellow right there. I don't see little men in the back holding him up and propping him up. Look, President shuffles, and he's always stuttered, and he's always, shot from the hip. sometimes imprudently. But I don't get a sense that there is a lack of focus and a lack of leadership there, and I don't. I mean, I get it coming from Republicans, but I certainly don't get it coming from fellow Democrats. And
well, can I ask you a question?
sure.
Yeah. I mean, this is becoming more and more commonplace in big media outlets, from the New York Times to Politico and a lot in between. What do you sense is behind all of that? Why are big publications, national publications, pushing that narrative more and more? What's behind that?
Okay, I'm going to give you the 25-cent assessment here. I know how conventional wisdom works. It starts at breakfast in the Mayflower. It starts with a 10:30 in the evening phone call. Did you hear this? I was at a bar and I heard that. What do you think of this? It starts with planting a story, planting an idea, talking to a handful of other pundits, trying to reflect what influencers inside the Beltway, inside Manhattan, are thinking and talking about. Some of the stories are pure fiction, others are based on an observation. And I've seen this done because I've worked with political consultants almost my entire adult life. There becomes not only an echo chamber, but there becomes an expansion chamber. Without mentioning any last names, you remember my friends Larry and Phil in Manhattan. You were just old enough to remember those guys. I used to see Larry read the late evening editions of the Daily News and the New York Post and the New York Times, circle a few items that he found interesting, embellish on those, and start calling his reporters late at night into the next morning, 7:30, and by by noon of that day, those stories embellished were coming back to him. Did you hear about this? And it had all started with a couple of circled items in those late editions and Larry embellishing. The important thing here, I think, is that doesn't work so much anymore. Folks have their own sorts. Folks can be their own Larrys now and read their own stuff and make their own interpretations, share them on social media. And in many ways, that's how something goes from the Twitter sphere or the Instagram sphere or whatever you call it, out to the general public. The bottom line is that's the talk about Biden. You do see him walking slowly. You do see him shuffling. But could he have delivered that State of the Union message? Not only reading from a teleprompter, but taking it right to the Republicans in banter back and forth and actually making them look bad. I'm being very partisan here. I understand that. But that does not look like a man to me who is not fit to be president of the United States.
Yeah.
Until I'm proven otherwise, I'm open, but nobody's been able to prove otherwise. So, but that's how these stories start.
But I interpret that as the knives are out for him. Now I know
Yes.
that sounds brutal, but I'm saying that metaphorically. And so that's the thing that we have to ponder. Why are the knives out for him? Why is this becoming more commonplace among the biggest media outlets?
Very simple answer, and that's where we come in. Take Bill Clinton, whose problems were legion, and take Joe Biden. Bill Clinton's numbers were always in the high 50s and low 60s. You don't touch anybody then. It's not in the press's interests to beat up on somebody who's much, much more popular than they are.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as a president or whomever begins to slide in the polls, then the sharks come
Mm-hmm.
out and you start to see some blood in the water.
It's ugly.
You'll see stories, if you see Biden hitting 50% or even staying at high 40s, the tenor and the color of the blood is going to change.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's track that.
I think we do. Let's come back next week, see how we did.
You got it.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yep. Have a good one.